This is the best practices for exploring culturally responsive teaching and design in the online environment. My name is Dr. Lisa Giacumo, and I'm an assistant professor at Boise State University's Organizational Performance and Workplace Learning Department. This webinar is being hosted on behalf of OPWL as well as AECT's Culture, Learning, and Technology Division. We are excited to have this webinar because today's online classroom can be culturally diverse for a variety of reasons, including international students studying in the United States or taking online courses while in their own country, as well as American students who may come from culturally diverse families and communities. Additionally, newer modalities of online learning are also bringing educational opportunities to students around the globe, distributed and taught in various ways through colleges and universities in the United States and beyond. This trend towards globalization of distance education, specifically online learning, provides an environment ripe for investigation of research-based practices for designing and teaching online courses for culturally diverse students. And with that, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Amy Grincewicz and Dr. Bethany Simunich. They both work at Kent State University, and I will allow them to tell you some more.
Thanks, Lisa. Bethany and I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to be with us as we discuss best practices for exploring culturally responsive teaching and design in the online environment. The information we provide comes from our interests in developing online courses that relate to the current needs for a culturally diverse population. I'm Dr. Amy Grincewicz, and I am a senior instructional designer in the College of Business, as well as a Quality Matters course review manager. I also serve on the Quality Matters Ohio Consortium Executive Board as a course review manager for the state of Ohio.
So hi everybody, my name is Bethany Simunich and I am the Director of Online Pedagogy and Research at Kent State University. I work with Amy. I teach both online and face-to-face, but right now I concentrate mostly on conducting faculty development for online teaching and learning as well as professional development for educational technologists and instructional designers. So we wanted to begin today by talking about why this topic is relevant to both educators and instructional designers. So for example, even if you feel that learners in a course are relatively homogeneous in terms of demographics or cultural background, things such as that, data tells us that online classrooms tend to be even more culturally diverse than our face-to-face classrooms. Additionally, more and more institutions are marketing online courses or certificate programs or degree programs to international students, not just in the United States, but also living in their home country, often in partnership with institutions and instructors embedded in the country itself. So both for US-based and international learners, diversity is something that must be considered both during the analysis and the design stage. It's also really important to understand that ID best practices that include cultural considerations are ideally flexible and they're better able to respond to the needs of all students, regardless of their background. So we know that social presence, or the ability for our online students to feel real, quote unquote real, and connected to a learning community is a really big influence on a student's sense of belonging. However, if we design social presence opportunities into a course that only reflect one cultural perspective, other students may actually feel distanced by those opportunities and activities. For example, we often assume that students will be native language speakers and have a shared sociocultural background, but that's not always the case. So then we employ social presence strategies within the design to promote interaction, for example, but for students who may already feel marginalized and or are from cultures that have a different cultural norm for teaching and learning, those strategies that we have included to design for inclusion might actually serve to reinforce marginalization.
Recognizing and supporting cultural differences in the online classroom is the responsibility of the instructor, and aligned with the idea of teaching presence, culturally responsive teaching begins with culturally responsive design. Culturally responsive design practices account for and adapt to the broad diversity of cultural contexts, beliefs, and practices of learners, as well as help prepare instructors and students alike for living and learning in a multicultural world. Culturally responsive pedagogy and practice facilitates and supports the achievement of all students. In culturally responsive classrooms and courses, effective teaching and learning occur in a culturally supported, student-centered context whereby the strengths of students promote the achievement of the necessary learning. The design of the ideal learning environment should embrace a multicultural model of instructional design, where the design of instructional resources reflect the multicultural realities of society, cover numerous ways of teaching and learning, and advocate equity of learning outcomes. Achievement of such culturally responsive learning environment, however, requires attention to cultural diversity on a number of levels. Cultural influences instruction at 5 levels: institutional, instructional, content, instructors, and students, which affect the acceptance, use of, and impact on instructional resources. The implication is that educators should 1. Promote universal principles of learning, and 2. Cultural influences both the learning process and its outcomes. Research shows that when designing multicultural learning environments, instructional designers must be cognizant of learner needs and design instructions for those needs using learning and instructional theories. For example, the design of an online course in the West differs from the East, with Western instruction being more process-oriented, learner-centric, and inductive. Eastern instruction typically follows a more structured, lecture-based, deductive model that emphasizes exams. However, a problem lies in the fact that designers are often not sure how to address culture in the design process. Learners from different cultural backgrounds report that they did not experience online learning as culturally inclusive with regard to engagement with content. Most often, online learning environments do not incorporate cultural and language differences into the design. One problem, though, may be that instructors are unsure how to identify the cultural identity and background of their students. One solution to the uncertainty of the cultural diversity of an online classroom is to simply focus more broadly on design elements that engender social presence and reduce transactional distance. For example, instructional design strategies such as clarity of directions provided to learners, inclusion of learner and instructor introductions, course orientation videos, providing personalized feedback, including small guided group work, offering live office hours/consultations, sending individual learner emails, including structured asynchronous discussions, and options for both using social media and synchronous communication tools, are all examples of deliberate activities designed to promote presence and reduce distance. They are also examples of design strategies that, when well done, would benefit student learning regardless of the cultural background and context. In their work on determining which strategies might be most effective for engendering social presence, Dunlop and Lowenthal found that while certain strategies such as personal emails and individualized feedback were rated higher by learners than allowing learners to connect to their instructor and/or fellow learners. Many strategies to promote social presence are generally effective, though the degree of effectiveness may depend on the preferences and/or needs of the individual learner. Dunlop and Lowenthal state that students' perception of social presence isn't enhanced by just one instructional strategy or tool, but instead by a carefully crafted set of instructional strategies and tools that reinforce social presence as a valued part of teaching learning experience. Using cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to and effective for them include acknowledging legitimacy of cultural heritage of different cultures, meaningfulness between academics and lived social realities, Developing an intellectual, social, emotional, and political learning by using cultural resources to teach knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes. Encompassing curriculum, content, learning context, climate, relationships, instructional techniques, management, and assessment. Enabling students to be better human beings and more successful learners. Defying traditional methods using storytelling, cooperative learning, authentic learning experiences. Letting students find their own voice through cooperation, community, and connectedness. And finally, acquiring a deeper and accurate knowledge of diverse cultures and experiences helps develop interdependence.
So in addition to these culturally responsive characteristics and design strategies, one other important consideration to keep in mind is that culturally responsive design is relevant to the whole course, the entire course, not just what we may commonly pay more attention to in instructional design, such as alignment and clear instructions, but also the structure and the flow of the course, as well as course artifacts that are intended to bring the learning community together by promoting presence and interaction and reducing distance. So in designing online courses for multicultural diversity, designers must both implement instructional design best practices and also pay special attention to designing course structure, components, and interaction opportunities that attend to the cultural diversity of students by promoting presence. 3 design frameworks that we're going to talk about more and that can help us in this endeavor are the Quality Matters Higher Education rubric, Universal Design for Learning, and also Integrated Multicultural Instructional Design. So for the Quality Matters Education rubric, and they're on their 6th edition, the QM rubric is based on research-supported and published best practices. The QM rubric is a set of 42 specific standards that are organized under 8 general standards, and the QM rubric is used to review the design of online and blended courses. So the rubric includes annotation for each of the 42 standards that further explain the application of the standard and also provide examples and special conditions, such as if you were reviewing a competency-based education course, for example, or working with course objectives even that are mandated by an institution and can't be changed. Of the 8 general standards, 6 of them, learning objectives, assessment and measurement, instructional materials, learning activities and interaction, and course technology, deal with alignment. Shown here are a sampling of 5 Quality Matters specific review standards that reflect culturally responsive and culturally sensitive instructional design strategies. Standard 1.9, for example, is an initial strategy to promote social presence as students introduce themselves to one another and to the instructor. Standard 2.3 reflects expectations of language clarity to benefit all students, including those who are ESL students. And then standards 3.3, 4.2, and 5.4, all shown on this slide, reflect providing clear instructions for students for how they will be evaluated, as well as how they should interact with course content, one another, and the instructor.
Cultural variability may lead to learning differences among students, and the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL framework, can also be used to create environmental responsive to culturally diverse learners. As a framework, UDL requires educators to think proactively about the needs of all learners by utilizing a backwards design approach. UDL as a framework establishes a universal curriculum rather than forcing students to adjust to a general curriculum created for particular students. And 2, acknowledging the continuum of learning that exists by adjusting for the differences that occur for all students, not just those students with disabilities. When starting to design a course, combining UDL and culturally responsive teaching provides multiple methods of assessing the learner content, whether by providing translations in a student's first language or providing ways for a student to understand the reasoning style behind it, allows for multiple means of representation. The use of visual representation for delivering content, including charts, graphs, and images, can acknowledge different ways of knowing and encourage students to connect their lived experiences with course expectations. The course should also provide multiple means for students to demonstrate their knowledge through familiar means of expression. For example, an accessible and familiar organization structure for composition for a familiar approach to solving problems. Designing courses that focus on dialogue and collaboration can encourage students to express their integration of course material with their lived experience, to use newly obtained knowledge to expand their knowledge base and reinforce the importance of dialogue, which is both a component of transactional distance theory and the community of inquiry dimension of social presence. Last but not least, the curricula should offer multiple means of engagement focused on student-centered learning. Student-centered learning is a central practice to culturally relevant courses and can focus on inquiry and problem-solving activities. The UDL framework shares several common traits with culturally responsive teaching practices. As you can see on the slide, these include a belief of high expectations for each student, encouraging each student to draw upon their own knowledge and experiences to sustain engagement, using a variety of instructional modalities appropriately aligned for academic success, creating optimal challenges for students, developing resourceful, knowledgeable, goal-directed students, and finally, encouraging exploration of information through multiple cultural lenses. Integrated Multicultural Instructional Design, or IMID, is an additional design framework that can be used to promote presence for culturally diverse learners. The goal of IMID is to promote the integration of multicultural content and diverse teaching and learning strategies into curricula, programs, and courses. IMID has 4 components that represent how we learn, how we teach, what we learn, what we teach, how we assess academic support services, how we support learning, and finally, how we demonstrate what we have learned, how we assess learning. Each of these 4 areas work together to create a culturally responsive environment. As you can see on the slide, each of the 4 elements of the IMID model align to the 3 UDL principles as well as the QM standards.
So we wanted to provide one example, and we talk about this in our book chapter as well, because as Amy spoke about, multiple means of expression encourage students to be strategic and goal-oriented, while multiple means of engagement promote purposeful, motivated students. So this is one example of a project that encompassed culturally responsive practices and really made adjustments to create a culturally responsive lesson. So for this project, the instructor recognized that human rights are defined and carried out in various ways that are often culturally situated. So rather than focusing the assignment on one definition of human rights or going back to the textbook, the project was created so that students could critically examine and share their own understanding of human rights, including how human rights are seen in their own countries. So this project then used culturally responsive practices to establish inclusion, develop attitude, enhance meaning, and also engender competence. So here are some great questions to ask ourselves when designing courses, whether we're an instructional designer or a faculty member or a collaboration of the two. Obviously, we want to consider who our learners are so that we can potentially tailor our strategies to the students who take the course. However, as Amy mentioned, sometimes we're not sure of the diverse makeup of our students, and so a lot of the things that we talked about today really are universally applicable and designed to help all students. After we really analyze who the learners are in our course, we really want to reflect and respect the diversity of our students using the culturally responsive instructional design strategies that will be most beneficial for them, and that work well also with our course topics and even the teaching strategies that we might employ during delivery. In doing so, it's helpful then to align our efforts with one of the instructional design frameworks that we talked about today.
So in putting together the book chapter, the workshop that will be given at AECT, as well as the presentation, we listed some key texts that have been very influential in helping Bethany and I kind of put things together. Being aware of culture, diversity, and inclusion issues is key when thinking about online learning environments. Online students differ greatly depending on their background and context. Their identities, behaviors, and lifestyles are expressions of their social background and directly influence their learning preferences. The awareness of the multicultural environment and valuing these many differences are critical steps in the learning process. As online learning providers, we need to continue to be aware of the fluidity of culture and its impact on the learning experiences. Providing the space where students can share and celebrate these cultural differences is a path to creating a more collaborative environment and therefore a more conducive to learning. Some of our key references that we use throughout today. And then finally, our contact information if you have any questions or additional questions that we may not get to during the Q&A session.
So we anticipated that at least some people will be watching this as a recording. So if you are, please continue to reach out to Amy and myself. One of the things that we did want to note before we take your questions is that we focused a lot on the instructional design strategies that were culturally responsive today. This is something obviously that needs to be carried through with delivery. So some of the teaching strategies and how the instructor would interact with the students and really be mindful of some culturally diverse practices, you know, even when they're giving feedback is important as well. But with that, that's the slides that we had for you today, because we did anticipate that you might have some good general questions or even some specific applications of this if any of you are currently working on designing a course and you know for a fact that you're going to have students in that are from other cultures or other backgrounds. And perhaps any questions about that we could help you with. And Amy, in the chat, Hillary asked if we could go back to the reference slides. So if you could pop those back up.
I'll stay on key text for a little bit and then I'll switch over to references.
Okay. So yes, go ahead and unmute your mic. Feel free to ask a question in the chat or ask a question via your mic.
Hi, it's Sylvia Rogers asking a question, and I was a few minutes late, so I may be asking something that you covered earlier, so I apologize in advance. I do teach online courses, and you know, I have like a whole variety of students, from traditional age students to adult students, and different, you know, there's not I guess, you know, you had said that a lot of these strategies were good overall, but is there, when you have a variety of students from different contexts, ages, religions, all of the above, what is a good strategy?
I would say that both in researching this topic and in my own experience, that's the most common scenario, where either we're not sure of the makeup of our students, or we know that they're just kind of all over, you know, the board. And for that reason, we really concentrated on those design strategies, for example, those that are under UDL, because we know that that helps all students regardless of any physical or learning disabilities they might have, regardless of if you mentioned age differences, if they're ESL students. And so really the big idea, one of the big takeaways here is that if you design for all learners, you really are designing for all learners. I think typically when we focus our instructional design efforts, we're really designing for, if we think about it, this small subset of learners where English is their first language, they're within the same general age range, they have the same general, you know, cultural backgrounds, they have the same amount of preparation for the course, and we're kind of designing for the common student in the class. This kind of flips that a little bit on its head and opens it up and says there really is no common student for most of us, especially online, because the demographic data tells us that, as you mentioned, the age range is wider, traditionally older. Students come from a greater variety of backgrounds, and so focusing on just, for example, those UDL principles should really attend to the needs of your learners regardless of their age or where they're from.
Thank you.
Can you speak to any specific applied strategies that either of you have used for creating multi-ability groups in small group work?
All the groups that I ever create are always multi-perspectives, and so they're always very diverse. And part of that is at the very beginning of the course when I do ask the students for their introductions, I put in questions about their culture into those introductions and stuff and other pieces that can help me kind of create those diverse groups, because I think that really helps strengthen the groups. Because if you have, you know, a group of all engineering majors, you're going to get the same type of response. But if you're mixing up your disciplines, your cultures, all of that, you can really create a wide variety of perspectives. So a lot of that I do right within the introduction forum, but you can also do a simple little survey that you send to your students at the very beginning. And you may also want to, especially for online courses, when you're kind of reaching out to your students, you know, a few days before the course starts, or maybe a week or two before the course starts, you know, send that survey so you get some feedback on who your students are before day one, so you can already have them in their groups before the class starts.
We also, I see, have some good questions in the chat. So Maria, you asked, could you tell us a bit about the platform where you designed the course? I'd like to know how you address the cultural bias implicit in any software. That is a really good question and observation. For Amy and myself, probably like most of you, we are working within our institutional LMS. And for most of us, there are some fundamental things and layout things, especially about the LMS, that cannot be changed. I think that's one of the reasons why we tried to focus our efforts instead on the instructional design of the course rather than the LMS in which the course is being offered. But you are absolutely right in pointing out that there is a cultural bias implicit in the software. It's not anything at our institution that we're able to do anything about, so we try to concentrate on the things that we can do something about. But that's a very interesting comment and consideration. If any of you have maybe LMSs that are a little bit more flexible, I'd love to hear more about that in the chat as well. Hannah, this is a really good comment. So you're saying you've been approaching UDL from a trauma-informed approach and using these conceptual lenses to organize your thinking about that work. That's fantastic. I can see, and just so this is something that I'm not really familiar with, but just from what you've typed there, I can really see how that could intersect with what we talked about with regards to social presence, and really helping them feel as though they're part of a learning community as well, and that they have that trust and that rapport with one another.
So I've been doing that work in combination with problem-based learning specifically.
Okay.
And under an applied cognitive load framework, where I'm thinking of the cognitive load of learning in a task or a situation and recognizing that there are orientation loads associated with cultural differences, contextualization of information loads, loads associated with making choices, and putting that information all under the trauma-informed approach, where if you recognize that traumatized students are the ones that are going to have the most limits on cognitive load, and making it as cognitive load-wise safe for a traumatized student, it ends up making it culturally responsive as well and a universal design for learning, because when you're talking about trauma, you don't know where that trauma is coming from. And it could be coming from all of these different areas of different processing, like cognitive differences and learning differences could be where that trauma is coming from.
Yeah.
Domestic violence could be where that trauma is coming from. All these cultural differences, community differences. And if you use that trauma framework as that lens, it really helps me at least think about these strategies and supports, not just as disparate elements, but in these different categories.
That's a really fantastic way to think about it, and I really appreciate your comment and your contribution here. I also, just thinking in terms of cognitive load as you were speaking, I think a lot of the strategies that we would use and classify under culturally responsive design are also designed to reduce the cognitive load in the places where we want it reduced. So just as an example, if a student comes in already with a high level of anxiety about being successful in an online course, and they're met with even a poorly organized course, or a course that doesn't have clear instructions for things or clear criteria for evaluation, they come in with a load here, and that can push them up here. So regardless of why that load is elevated or why it exists, I think some of these strategies, and especially those that align with UDL practices, can really serve to reduce that. So really interesting lens to bring to bear on this. Thank you. Okay, Maria has a question here. Could you tell us a bit about the design, not the instruction, you use to address cultural diversity, how it differs from standard design? All right, I'm chuckling a little bit only because ideally, you know, if for any of you that are in an instructional designer role, or you're faculty designing your own course, ideally we would want to attend to all of these strategies and practices that we talked about in these 3 frameworks, because what I hope that you notice, especially by that table on that one slide that we displayed, there's overlap there because there should be. They're talking about the same good practices and strategies, and they're there for the benefit of all students. So ideally, that should be our standard design. However, sometimes it's not something that we really have the time and the scope for. And sometimes it's just a matter of, you know, we as designers or we as faculty maybe are not intimately familiar with all the strategies as we should be. So I want to answer your question by saying this should be our standard design. This should be our standard design practice. And that's why Amy and I emphasize that this is to the benefit of all students. You know, we're looking at particularly through that lens of culturally responsive design, but it's a benefit for all students. So I guess that it differs in that we're trying to specifically attend to some of these things that maybe aren't on our radar, especially the first time that we design a course. So maybe these are things that we need to save for the revision, or we need to pre-think about. But depending on, you know, how much time you have to design that course, you may not be paying attention to some of these things and really focusing instead just on alignment, for example, and forgetting all these other things that really contribute to student success. Amy, how would you answer that?
Well, that was, I think, better than I could. But I would also like to add that part of it is, when at least I'm working with faculty, I really try to encourage them to do like personalized learning, where we're giving the students choices. So we have like a general prompt for an assignment, but we're allowing the student, you know, kind of following that UDL principle of allowing the student to represent their learning however way they want to express it. So we're doing expression and representation kind of together. And so it could be, you know, especially with journals, we do it a lot where they can do a text-based journal, they can do an audio journal, they can do a video journal, or they could even create some type of artwork depending on where their strengths are. So that really does kind of help where, you know, giving your students choices kind of helps kind of bridge that cultural gap, because not all students are going to want to do a speech, not all students are going to want to write a paper. So kind of including some of those choice options on their assessments can really help.
Also in the chat, so shout out to the shout out. Yes, thanks for sharing the link to the online equity rubric. That definitely is a great resource to check out and consider. And I think that because it highlights things like access and bias, and maybe not some of the things that are immediately in the forefront of our mind when we think of culturally responsive instructional design, I like it for those reasons, and definitely something to look into and to bookmark. I'd be interested to know, for those of you that are here today, can you type in the chat, or is your primary role as an instructional designer, or as a faculty member, or some other role? You guys didn't know there'd be a pop quiz today. Okay. All right, so it seems like it's a pretty good mix of IDs and faculty, and then some of us are ID/faculty. Okay. Okay, so for those of you that are here, for some of the strategies that we talked about, are these things that you regularly try to pay attention to when you're designing online courses, or are there things that they're in the back of your mind and you know that they're important, but right now if you could just get a well-aligned course and get it up and running, that would meet today's goal. So let me know if these are things that were not on your radar or things that you do regularly employ. And we also have a new question from Maria. Considering some students are independent learners, how do you navigate personalized learning with encouraging discussion and collaboration?
It's definitely not easy, Maria. A lot of it is not all classes will it align with. It really goes back to the outcomes. And I know with collaboration for group activities and all of that, we do like to rotate the roles in the groups so that not everyone is doing one thing each time, but it is challenging.
And I would also keep in mind that there are so many different ways to collaborate that sometimes, again, we rely on these tried and true things like, well, let's have a group discussion or do group project work. But even if you have peer evaluation and feedback where they exchange drafts of a given assignment, for example, and they provide feedback to one another, that still is collaboration, but it is more in tune with the likes, I'll put it that way, of learners who tend to prefer working more on their own because it isn't a big group project and it's something that's a more personalized interaction. So there's other options for collaboration and interaction, I think, than just some of the traditional larger group work ones that we might think of. So Hannah responded here. She does collaborative learning as the default and then allows more independent learning as the system has a better shared understanding of roles and expectations as a member of the learning community. Okay. And Suzanne responded to my question. Thank you. So these are things that are on your radar, but maybe some new ideas today, or even just some reminders to all of us to try to employ more of these strategies as we're designing our courses. It's definitely something that I think is a great approach to revision, to go back to an existing course and look at it through this lens, look at it for some of the strategies that we talked about today, or utilize one of the 3 frameworks that we mentioned, and that will even help you enhance the course with revisions that will make it more culturally responsive and more helpful to all learners.
One comment for kind of the instructional designers. One of the things that we've started working on in the College of Business is rather than just having the course developer or the subject matter expert develop the presentations, is having that person draft the script for all the presentations, but then having different faculty members, different voices record those presentations, because there has been a lot of talk where if, let's say, a male professor develops the course and a female instructor is teaching the course, that there's some issues there. So we try to use multiple voices when we're doing the recordings to kind of help with that cultural aspect.
That's actually a really important point, Amy. I'm glad that you brought that up, because that can be also one of the benefits that we talk about if we are collaboratively designing a course, or we're designing a course that we know will serve as a master course and will be taught by other instructors. Having a way to really elevate and respect the diversity of our faculty and our experts that really come together to design or contribute to a course, I think is really demonstrating to students that we respect the diversity of them and their voices as well.
Maria, I see that you wrote critical race theory. Not as familiar with that as you might be.
I think hers was in response to CRT is big in California. Is that what you were responding to, Maria? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm definitely interested in chatting. I know when I do the workshops at AECT, there's always this high at the end of the workshop where everyone wants to collaborate and really kind of do some research on this and think through things. And sadly, we all get on the planes and come home and kind of forget about it. But I think part of the reason that CLT was doing this webinar, as well as many of the presentations that they're supporting for the conference, are really to help continue that conversation and get groups of people together interested in this topic to really kind of expand the knowledge base for what's out there.
Absolutely. And if you or if you know of anyone else, participants included today, or your networks of people who might be interested in sharing their approaches to creating culturally responsive materials or design or instructional environments inside of live classrooms, I would love to hear from them. So if you can please share my contact information. We're always looking for webinar presenters to come in and kind of show what they do and how they do that too. So please feel free to reach out. I'll type my contact information into the chat box below.
These are great questions. Thank you, everybody.
Please save these questions for the CLT panel discussion that's at AECT too, because you'll hear more than just Bethany and I's perspectives.
Well, as we mentioned, if you have any questions that occur to you after the webinar, or if you're watching the recording, please don't hesitate to reach out to Amy and myself. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to all of you and really to get your feedback and your comments. Thank you so much. And Lisa, Megan had a question. Is the recording going to be emailed out or is it posted somewhere?
The recording, once we assign closed captions to it, will be uploaded to our Boise State University Organizational Performance and Workplace Learning webinar series on YouTube. So if you would like to send me an email, I'd be happy to share that link with you to the channel or to the webpage where we host that channel.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Any final questions before we close? Okay. Well, thank you again, everybody. Big thank you from Amy and myself.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Amy Grincewicz and Dr. Bethany Simunich.
You did it.
Yeah, I'm so excited and grateful for your time today. Also, I'm grateful for everyone else's time who contributed to asking questions and discussion, and just to show your support for the CLT webinar and this very important topic for our practice today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting us, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I will contact you guys with the link as soon as it's available.
Sounds good. Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.